It's election night 2020, and the centre of pro-Trump MAGA world is the rooftop terrace at 101 Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C.
We got all the alternative conservative media all here tonight to give you the absolute lowdown of what's going on.
Once top Trump advisor, now podcaster Steve Bannon, is in his element. The United States Capitol building is lit up behind him, there is a chill in the air, and Bannon is kicking off what will wind up being an 8-hour election night broadcast. He has a panel, maps, an election data guy, and everything.
We've got tremendous data analytics. It's been a huge day for the deplorables.
100 or so of those deplorables are there on the rooftop with him, ready for a big night of partying. This show Bannon is hosting, it has all the elements of an election night broadcast, but it's a lot stranger than that. For one thing, parts of it are in untranslated Mandarin.
这个对中国人来说，这一次大选应该是中国人5000年来最重要的一次。为什么？因为这次大选它意味着
Ludo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In fact, on that same rooftop, there are 4 different broadcasts happening at the same time. There's Bannon's show, there's another right-wing TV network, a right-wing radio network, and a dissident Chinese broadcaster.
They have free Chinese doing a live broadcast from the nation's capital overlooking right next to us. I've been over there already on G News, GTV.
Now, I've got to tell you up front, G News and GTV were part of a massive billion-dollar fraud being run by an exiled Chinese friend of Steve Bannon. They weren't legitimate news organisations as much as they were a way to get money out of Chinese expats. Really gives a sense of the tone of this whole operation. But even if your news organisation is an investing scam, covering an election takes planning. On Halloween, the weekend before the election, Bannon met with staff from the Chinese outlets to explain how the election night was going to play out.
What Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner.
Bannon knew something that would be key to Trump's quote-unquote victory. A basic piece of political science called the blue shift.
Will Americans accept an election result that comes after a blue shift?
Basically, when vote counting begins on election night in America, things initially look very good for Republicans like Donald Trump. But then gradually, as the night goes on, results shift towards the Democrats.
All of a sudden, Nevada flips. All of a sudden, Wisconsin starts to flip.
It's because Republicans are clustered in small towns, which report results faster.
And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm.
Trump is still your president!
That's our strategy, Bannon said. Trump will declare victory before the blue shift happens.
If Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states.
And of course, 3 days later...
We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
What Bannon said would happen...
If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
Happened.
To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won. So I just want to thank you.
What followed was 64 days of...
crazy shit.
The Biden crime family's stealing this election! The media's covering it up!
Someone's gonna get hurt, someone's gonna get shot, someone's gonna get killed. It has to stop.
Stop soiling yourself. We're in a war right now.
The law isn't on your side. History won't be on your side. Your conscience will not be on your side. And Lord knows, when you go to meet your maker, your soul is going to be very, very warm.
We are on the eve of one of the most important days in American history.
Let's have trial by combat!
4 years on, almost everyone involved has been bankrupted, charged with crimes, or sent to jail. It's all set up to happen again in a few weeks' time.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about.
In 2020, the plan didn't get much more complex than what Steve Bannon outlined in that leaked Halloween planning meeting.
Right up.
Trump and his allies, in a panic, tried desperately to improvise their way to victory in an election that they knew they had lost. This time, though, there has been 4 years of planning, of laying the groundwork for another try. Those 64 days of chaos between Election Day 2020 and the storming of the US Capitol on January 6th, they're like a blueprint of Trump's strategy this time around. In the next 5 episodes, we will look at that story and what it says about the chaos ahead of us. And in this first episode, the big, bold lie that started it all. I'm Matt Bevan, and from If You're Listening, this is America's last election.
The decision to cancel the 6 flights between Paris and Los Angeles comes 4 days after the United States increased its terror alert.
On Christmas Day in 2003, more than 1,000 Air France passengers were suddenly stranded at Paris airport.
Very frustrated, just want to get see my sister in LA for Christmas.
A bunch of cancelled flights in 2003 might seem like an odd place to start this story, but the man who triggered these cancellations also played a key role in the aftermath of the 2020 election. His name is Dennis Montgomery, and in 6 years of making this podcast, his story is perhaps the craziest I've ever come across. And the first time his work made the news was with these flights in 2003.
The Air France flights were cancelled after intelligence from the US Department of Homeland Security suggested Al-Qaeda members posing a credible threat were due to board.
See, there were no Al-Qaeda members due to board. There was, in fact, nothing objectively unusual or suspicious at all about these 6 flights.
The con man fooled CIA spies into grounding international flights.
Dennis Montgomery was a gambler and, let's say, an opportunist who claimed to have designed computer software with incredible abilities. He said his software could identify faces, objects, and patterns in CCTV footage. That might not seem incredible now, but remember this was 2003.
2003.
And Montgomery's software could do none of those things. The demonstrations he did to prove his tech worked were allegedly faked. But the CIA was sold. And in December 2003, they asked him to use his software in an unexpected way. See, the CIA was convinced that Arab news network Al Jazeera was somehow working with terror groups.
It is always interesting to me how Al Jazeera manages to be at the scene of the crime whenever a hostage shows up or some other problem happens to be there.
The CIA asked Montgomery to use his software to find out if there were any invisible, subliminal messages hidden in Al Jazeera broadcasts. Montgomery consulted his mystery machine and... oh wow! His computer said, yes, there are subliminal messages in these Al Jazeera broadcasts. Montgomery gave the CIA the results of his analysis. Streams of numbers and letters that he said that his software could detect hidden in the broadcasts. The CIA interpreted those numbers and letters to be flight numbers and started grounding planes. Merry Christmas.
The US Department of Homeland Security has released almost no information about the intelligence which has led to the extraordinarily specific measures against British Airways Flight 223.
The French government demanded that the US explain what was happening with all these flights, so they shared Montgomery's system. The French tried to replicate it themselves and quickly found out that what Montgomery was claiming was impossible. According to multiple reports, the whole thing was a hoax.
Today, based on a careful review of the available intelligence, we have lowered the threat level to yellow.
The CIA had gone all in on this big lie from Dennis Montgomery, and when the holiday season was over, they were humiliated. The agency quietly stopped working with Montgomery, but to avoid embarrassment, they didn't tell anyone that they'd been tricked. Montgomery kept getting contracts with the US government for years from departments the CIA never bothered to warn. It's difficult to track exactly what Montgomery got up to between 2003 and 2020, but he got up to a lot. There are piles of documents about dubious schemes filed to various US courts. We know he was arrested for writing $1 million in bad checks to Las Vegas casinos. He filed for bankruptcy. He tried to sue Barack Obama. He also tried to mount a defamation suit against a writer who alleged he was a con man. But then he never provided any evidence to help his own case. In 2014, he had a stroke, which left him with brain damage and partial paralysis on his left side. But that didn't stop him. He allegedly defrauded a sheriff in Phoenix and claimed that he wanted to blow the whistle on corrupt actions by the CIA, FBI, and NSA, but then never provided any evidence for that one either. As far as I can tell, Dennis Montgomery has never been interviewed in the media. These court documents and third-person accounts are all we have. And from this, it's hard to figure out what his motivation is, or how he was able to convince so many people of so many seemingly fake things. But reading these documents, you do come away understanding something. That if Dennis Montgomery says he has proof of a massive conspiracy that could shake American democracy to its core, you probably want to ask to see some evidence.
Our elites.
Or you could just tell Steve Bannon.
How does Dennis Montgomery fit into this story?
He's a genius, and he loves America, and he's on our side.
Montgomery himself never appeared on Steve Bannon's podcast or anywhere else. But his story was relayed by others, like retired Air Force General turned conspiracy theorist Thomas McInerney.
He's the programmer that made all this happen.
This is the theory, the one Steve Bannon picked up on Election Day Eve and started to amplify to his massive audience. It goes like this. Dennis Montgomery, while working with the CIA, concocted a supercomputer called the Hammer.
The Hammer is a surveillance tool that the Obama administration, 2 weeks after they took over, put it into another location and started using it politically against their enemies. And then they modified it with this software package that changes the votes. The software package is called Scorecard.
Okay, so Obama stole a supercomputer from the CIA and installed a program that can change votes. The computer is the Hammer, and the software is Scorecard. The Hammer and Scorecard. If that's the case, though, how did Trump win in 2016?
I can't talk about that.
Can't talk about it. Okay. McInerney said this would mean that on election day, Trump would get lots of votes early, but then the vote totals would change.
It's going to look good for President Trump, but they're going to change. And that's the danger that America and everybody must realize.
It's a theory that fits in well with the strategy Bannon was telling his Chinese media partners about a week out from the election. Early results would favour Republicans, Trump. But then, as counting continued from big cities and mail-in votes, the Democrats would gain more votes. Or would they? Maybe instead of those Democratic votes being counted, the change in fortunes would be down to a nefarious supercomputer flipping the votes.
Where did they go? 400,000 votes just disappeared?
The Hammer and the application that works with it, called Scorecard, is designed to change votes on the fly.
The Hammer and Scorecard. Incredible branding. Nobody's going to buy this, right?
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country.
I can remember where I was at this exact moment, listening to Trump's election night speech on the radio while I was driving home from my parents' place.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
He really did it. He claimed victory in an election he had lost. At the same time, on the roof of 101 Constitution Avenue, Steve Bannon was hyped up on Red Bull and exhausted from more than 10 hours of broadcasting. He threw to his data guy.
Is the president right? Did he win this tonight, Rich, in your mind?
Yeah.
No doubt.
But as far as I'm concerned, he's won.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. But it wasn't long until the actual vote totals showed that Biden had won.
The Fox News decision desk can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden will win.
In that planning meeting, Bannon was pretty good at explaining the blue shift. In the days after the election, he and his friends embraced a very different theory.
2 pieces of software called Hammer and Scorecard are being used by Democrats as a superweapon for voter fraud.
Dennis Montgomery, the CIA contractor turned whistleblower who created the Hammer and Scorecard.
Let's go back to Hammer and Scorecard.
They were used by the forces in the Democratic operatives that had access to these programs to change votes in this country.
Mr. Dennis Montgomery, who is a national hero in this matter.
What is Hammer and Scorecard?
This is not bullshit, this is real, guys.
It's not real, though. Not only did Democrats not hack the election, there's no evidence that the Hammer and Scorecard even exist. People like Dennis Montgomery thrive in situations like this. In the weeks after the 2020 election, Trump's team turned the little kernel of nonsense he provided into the big lie at the centre of election denialism.
They just need the president to declassify Hammer and Scorecard, and they need him to take the gag order off Dennis Montgomery.
In 2021, a company that makes voting machines called Dominion Voting Systems launched several defamation cases against people who had made allegations of election fraud. But it's not defamation if the whole thing is true, right? So the defendants asked Dennis Montgomery for his proof.
I want to get it out there for all to see and get these lawsuits gone immediately.
This is Mike Lindell, a Trump-supporting pillow magnate who was one of the people who made allegations against Dominion. He spent millions of dollars trying to prove the Hammer and Scorecard theory right, including paying an undisclosed amount of money to Dennis Montgomery to buy his company, including any information he had about the Hammer and Scorecard.
I own it all now. I bought it.
Mike Lindell claims that he owns this software, and of course with that comes all the data.
Lindell even promised to pay $5 million to anyone who could prove Montgomery's theory wrong.
Dennis Montgomery, every bit of his stuff is 100% valid because I paid a lot of money to validate it.
If that is true, it is a checkmate.
It wasn't a checkmate. When Lindell finally showed his hand, what he'd paid Montgomery for was 23 gigabytes of gibberish. A Trump voter with 45 years' experience in software engineering quickly and easily proved the data was nonsense. And multiple courts have ordered Lindell to pay him the $5 million that he promised.
You're an asshole, is what you are. No, he's an asshole.
Things have not turned out well for anyone involved in pushing the Hammer and Scorecard theory. The voting machine company Dominion has won more than $700 million in damages so far, with more lawsuits pending. Steve Bannon is in jail for contempt of Congress, awaiting release 5 days before the election. Bannon's Chinese business partner is in jail for fraud. His Chinese news network, which was part of that fraud, is gone. Dennis Montgomery, actually I've tried very hard to find out what he's up to, but there's no trace of him. I assume he's up to something very interesting. You don't even have to scratch the surface of the Hammer and Scorecard theory very hard to find that there is nothing underneath. But that's the case with all of the theories about the stolen election. Dead voters, people voting twice, immigrants voting, machines making mistakes. None of the theories about election fraud have been proven true, but that doesn't really matter.
We think Trump won. Absolutely. We think that the election was rigged.
Millions and millions of people buy into it.
Almost 70% of Republicans now say they believe the election was stolen.
How? Don't know. Something to do with computers and voting machines, the CIA, Obama, fraud. Millions of Americans have spent 4 years believing that. 4 years in which they've laid plans for this time around, this election. A retired federal judge named Michael Lutig gave evidence to Congress, and he said something quite astounding. He said Donald Trump and his allies are a clear and present danger to American democracy, and not because of what happened in the past, but because it might work next time.
That's what the former president and his allies are telling us.
Next month, Trump is likely to claim victory again, whether he has really won or not. He will do it early, before the blue shift. he's unlikely to ever concede defeat. And if he wins the election fair and square, we'll hear a lot more about the stolen 2020 election, not less, as Trump uses the office of the president to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. More than just telling us what they're going to do, they've been telling us for years exactly how they plan to do it.
The former president and his allies are executing that blueprint for 2024 in open and plain view.
What is that blueprint based on? That's next on America's Last Election.